Welcome to another episode of Mormon Discussion Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Reel. Grateful for the chance to be with you today. Wanted to get on and essentially say, look, this virus thing is going to have a huge effect on the world, and I think there's places we want to go to get information and to have conversations about that. Also, because we're Mormon or Post Mormon. These things affect us from other angles that it doesn't affect the rest of the world. And so I just wanted to provide a place where we could kind of think about those things. I wanted to show you guys just a map here. I'll share my screen. Give me a second. And we'll see if this opens up. But essentially, as we begin to see how this virus unfolds, the COVID-19 virus essentially started in China based on some bats that had the virus, and somehow a human in one of these bats came into contact with each other. And it then allowed this virus this whole mess has begun. We'll see up when your thing kind of slows down. So I apologize for the little sound hiccups. I've got everything on my computer closed down. Let's see what happens here. Regards to Mormonism, unfortunately, the use to both put the map up as well as to put up the sound, and to have my audio run seamlessly was an issue. But essentially, if you look at the map, if you go to Drudge Report, and I use the Drudge Report, where I'm not as big of a conservative as I used to be, but still see that as a valuable news source where a plethora of stories can kind of be thrown up against the wall, and people can kind of read the news of the day, both the wacky stuff as well as the serious news. And on Drudge Report, you can click the SIC map near the top of the screen. And the SIC map allows you to see the entire United States, as well as the rest of the world for that matter, and to see where these cases have broken out. I appreciate, hey, Allison, thank you for the message that the sound wasn't working. Hopefully we are back on, and it is. Give me a second. I'll double check my audio. But yeah, my mic is good. So if you guys are having issues, let me know. As I looked at the map, there were no cases in southern Utah except for the person on the cruise ship, and that was taken care of away from southern Utah. I live in southern Utah. There's one little dot there now. The dots are significantly growing in the northern Utah area, and all across the world. Italy has essentially been overwhelmed to the point where doctors were making the decision that anybody over 60 is essentially just having to be ignored. because the trouble with this virus, if you understand the problem with this virus is that it is so infectious in terms of everybody getting it quickly, and that the virus is doubling every 3 or 4 days. So if 10 people have it today, in 3 or 4 days, 20 people will have it. In 3 or 4 more days, 40 will have it. And in 3 or 4 more days, 80 will have it. And it is doubling every 3 or 4 days, to the point where even by socially distancing ourselves, this thing is not slowing down. Now, there's lots of things we could do. We can completely shut ourselves down, and you hope that you would catch all the cases, but logically that doesn't really add up. You're almost certainly not going to catch everybody. And so you shut down for a few weeks, you take care of all the sick who are sick now, and everybody they infect in their homes or have infected prior to this moment. And then when that shutdown is over, then everybody goes back to their normal lives or some level of social distancing. But there's always going to be a few people that we didn't catch had it, and they're going to transmit it to someone else. Even if you can think of like being locked up in your home with members of your home, let's say mom gets it, mom gives it to her son. So now a week has gone by, the son is still able to transmit it. He's still infectious. He gives it to his sister. A week goes by and she gives it to dad. And now in the course of a month, you still have somebody who is infectious. And so even by locking things down and us all going back to a normal life then after a month doesn't allow this thing to go away. Essentially, we just allow the hospitals to recoup, resupply, and now we're back at it again. And we're going to have to either do this in waves, or we just let this thing happen right here, right now. And if that's the case, then the hospitals will be deeply overwhelmed to the point where there will be 5, 6, 7, 8 patients to every available hospital bed, every available respirator, every available intubation unit. And if you can imagine a real pandemic in real time, even in 2020 with all of our technology, there are only so many hospital beds. There are only so many ventilation machines. And so to allow this thing just to run its course and say, the hell with it, we're going to let it run its course, would essentially exponentially increase the deaths that happen from this virus. They are saying about 3.4% roughly is the mortality rate of every 100 people who are shown to have contracted the illness. What their survival rate is, around 97. The trouble with that is that when it comes to older people, those 70 and up, that death rate drastically increases to the point that those 80 and up, the death rate is around 9 point something percent. And so if you can imagine 1 out of 10 of our grandparents, our aunts, our uncles, our parents, grandparents, I said, this illness, this infection is going to be serious. They said this morning, I was reading on the Drudge Report this morning, that smell is one of the indicators. And so maybe as a thought to each of you out there, it sounds like essentially that many people who are presenting, who have the illness but are not presenting major symptoms yet, one of the early symptoms to look for is that your sense of smell will be deeply inhibited, to the point where you can't smell a baby's dirty diaper, you can't smell the cat litter box, you can't smell some of the stronger smells around you. So if you notice that, I know other countries are already asking folks to self-quarantine if that's the case. So again, this thing hit it hard in China. China eventually, because it, from a political standpoint, is essentially a dictatorship, and China's government is able to essentially put its foot down and say, this is how we're going to do things, and we'll essentially bring violence in if you don't listen. But they essentially put everybody to their homes and have, in a deep way, slowed down the transmission of this infection in many places. Italy, on the other hand, didn't take some of these steps, and it got blasted. And so Italy right now is where a lot of the most horrible news is coming from regards to this infection. It is interesting. I've got COPD. I'll just say something personal here. I've got COPD. I use an Advair Discus every day. And I take my Advair Discus, a puff it in the morning, puff at night. My lungs don't work right. They work at like an 80% efficiency, which is fine. I do fine if I don't, try to do any kind of major exertion. But I have kind of this mild asthma all the time. And so I cough a little more, and I have to clear my throat a lot more often. And I take this medicine. And there are reports that those who are infected and who recover, that they have some post damage to their lungs. So they have additional breathing difficulty with their lungs. And I'll be honest, that scares me to death. And I lost my mother to cancer a few months back. And I've got a father who's around, who's healthy, he exercises every day. He's 60 years old. But again, this thing makes me nervous. And so I know that a lot of you are nervous. I know some of you have parents who are older. I know some of you have siblings who have weakened immune systems due to health issues that they've dealt with through their life. And I think we all have to take a step back and go like, okay, maybe I'm going to be out of work. Maybe a company here and there is going to go out of business. Maybe some real financial ruin is going to come from this. Maybe we enter a recession. Maybe we enter another depression. And I think entering a recession it's already happened. I had about well, I won't even say how the amount, but I had money invested through Ameritrade in the stock market. And about a week ago, I sold half of it. And then about 3 days ago, I sold the rest of it. And so I don't have any stocks anymore. I'm just waiting for this thing to bottom out, and then I'll throw some money back in. But this thing is scary. And all of us just have to be careful. Wash your hands multiple times a day. You don't have to be told this. Don't hoard things. I think the grocery store is going to be available to all of us through this entire thing. But be careful out there. In regards to Mormonism, and I'll do this, I think at some point I'm going to be locked up in my house. I think that Utah and other states at some point, when things deem it necessary, local state governments will shut areas completely down in order to relieve the pressure of influx of patients to hospitals. And I think that'll happen. And at some point when that does, I hope to every day sit down with you and just have a conversation about this virus and about what it's doing and what some of the news is out there about it. In the meantime, I wanted to start this episode just talking a little bit about Mormonism. And I don't believe Mormonism anymore. I think it's not just, when you talk to somebody about Mormonism not being true, most believing members go like, oh, there's evidence on both sides, and I have my evidence for why I believe, and you have your evidence for why you don't. But at the end of the day, they're relatively equal. And for me, that's not true. For me, the evidence is so overwhelming, it is practically demonstrable, minus somebody being permitted to make conjecture and allowances on 1,000 issues. Mormonism isn't true. But Mormonism makes certain claims about itself. Radio Free Mormon just did an episode that released yesterday about backdating prophecy. And he uses New Testament primarily, Old Testament primarily, but he does dabble into the Book of Mormon as well. And he talks about how there's lots of backdated prophecies in the Book of Mormon, in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, and that those things show something. One of the things he talked about was how the church said some things 6 months ago, and how it's going to be very easy for members of the church primarily, but I think also leaders to some extent, to falsely use that as if President Nelson had some sense of prophetic awareness that this was coming. And so by creating home church, number one, and then by saying that this general conference would be the coolest thing ever, this thing would be unlike any other conference we've ever had before. So take your vitamins, right? Get your rest, because great things are coming. And you're going to see members of the church turn that around and have those things be evidence that President Nelson is prophetic. But I think there's one crystal clear thing that we're going to see from the coronavirus. And let me just say, I'm scared to death of this infection that's coming, this wave of infection that's going to, probably when it's all said and done, 80% to all of us, somewhere in that range, will have caught this thing. And the goal for each of us is to catch it at a rate slow enough that hospitals can tend to us and take care of every one of us and give every one of us the best chance at survival. Now, there have been worse plagues. We hope to do an episode sometime soon on the Almost Awakened podcast where we talk about the different pandemics that have happened in recorded human history, and we'll do that. So hope to tackle that. But with Mormonism makes specific claims. And one of those claims is that Mormonism has priesthood power. Mormonism has the ability to give its men special access to God so that they can lay hands upon heads and anoint and bless and heal. And that's a unique claim. That involves supernatural God magic. It involves Mormons being able to thwart off major health issues better than the rest of the world can, and very least certainly better than an atheist could. But you're going to watch something happen, and here's what's going to happen. As this infection moves its way across the United States, you are going to see, now you should, if Mormonism is true, you should see Utah's recovery rate be statistically significant when juxtaposed against the rest of the world. Specifically, if we take in similar demographics, so areas with similar populations, similar wealth, and similar quality and quantity of hospital and medical care. And I can tell you right now what's going to happen because I already know the answer. The answer is Mormonism doesn't have access to real power. And so when this infection takes its course, and heavens forbid it does, I want nothing more than like the rest of us that this thing just go away. But it's not going to. And so as one who spends their time being a journalistic voice of sorts, although certainly more polemic than many, being a journalistic source of sorts as I sort out history and data and news, I feel like I have some responsibility to sit back and watch this thing as an observer and point out where this thing can't do what it claims to do. And so we should expect over the course of the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever it takes for this thing to make its way through our population. And again, we can have it be fast and the deaths will be exponentially higher, or we can go through this thing slow, reduce the number of deaths, and probably choke out all of the financial confidence that exists currently in this country, and essentially enter a deep recession, if not depression. And so as the next few years or year happen, we are going to eventually have data on what the death rate was in various places based on the steps they took. I actually expect Utah, when compared to similar demographic areas, to fare worse because of its arrogance about what it can do and can't do because it has the church on its side. But that said, we should expect, as believing Mormons, we should expect the recovery rate to be better. For every 100 people in Ohio, maybe a half or a quarter of a person has access and desire to receive a priesthood blessing. In Utah, of every 100 people who get sick, approximately 50 people have access to or desire to get a blessing. Priesthood is the power of God. And we read in Mormon canon, lesson manuals, that Mormons have priesthood power and have access to heal others. What we're going to find when this is all done is that Utah has no access to magic, no access to special gifts, no access to healings that are beyond what the rest of the world can do. And so I'm interested to watch this unfold, because it's going to happen regardless. And then to watch as this data piles in that shows that Mormonism had no ability to protect its members from this infectious pandemic any better than any other group of people, atheist included. It also is crazy that Utah is the #1 state for this hoarding, right? Mormons were supposed to have a year's supply of food. Mormons were supposed to have a year's supply of water and of fuel. They were supposed to be rocking and rolling. And now I can't even get toilet paper to wipe my ass because I go to Walmart or Albertsons or Lynn's or Harmon's, and unless I get there at 6 a.m. in the morning and hoard the stuff myself, it is gone and off the shelves. Another little tidbit, by the way, don't use ibuprofen if you catch this illness. The early data is that ibuprofen actually creates a safer space for the infection to grow and be severe. They are recommending Tylenol, not ibuprofen. So just another word to the wise, and we'll repeat these things in future episodes too when we think of them. But don't use ibuprofen, use Tylenol. Obviously, those each have medical names, and there are tons of off-brands, but you get the idea. The other thing that you're going to see happen here, I still think whatever they were going to announce in this general conference, they're going to do. I think something extreme is coming, something significant. They brag this thing up. But I do anticipate somebody in this conference is going to point back to President Nelson as if he was prophetic about home church, at least. I also wouldn't be surprised if somebody makes a joke. You know, you said, President Nelson, that this conference would be unlike any other. Was he right? You know, and then we'll get a laugh, not from the people in the building because it'll be empty, other than maybe a couple of dozen. But instead, we will get a laugh from the home audience. It also should be noted that the church deeply dropped the ball in trying to get its missionaries home quickly. It kept putting off doing the right thing, and now we're borderline about to be too late, and they're trying to get missionaries home. And I'm really sorry for those of you who have sons or daughters out on missions who are not home yet. We just had some good friends whose son came home from a mission just in the last couple of days. And now by having all these kids flying all over the country and all over the world, essentially just put at greater risk. We could have done it when the cases were much lower, less people had it, much more safety and security in sending these kids home and not having them be the spread of the contagion. But now we have these kids going back and forth all over the world through air travel, spending time in clustered airports on a closed-in plane, and then they come home to their families. And some of these kids, if no ifs, ands, or buts, some of these kids will be a carrier. Maybe only 1%, maybe 0.2%, whatever it is. But some will be a carrier and now bring this infection somewhere else. So in conference, I expect that kind of a joke. I expect there to be some pointing at Nelson at being prophetic. But the reality is, if I was a prophet, and if God spoke to me, and if God told me, and God's done it, God's gone ahead and opened his prophets' mouths and said lots of things, even when they weren't going to be listened to. You could take Daniel doing the Lord's will and not being believed. You can take a Benadiah out of the Book of Mormon and doing the Lord's will and not being believed. We don't need people to believe in order for God to have his prophets speak. His prophets speak regardless. But the reality is that President Nelson isn't a prophet, and he had no effing clue this was going to happen. He had no effing clue this was going to occur. And to the point where the church got caught flat-footed, and stammering on trying to figure out a healthy response, to the point where it was still sending its missionaries out tracting when the world was saying, please don't do something like that. We should all only be in necessary places. And it's one thing if Mormonism can promise, like, we really do have priesthood power, we really could heal you, and we really do know what heaven looks like, and this is what it is, and this is who gets here, then maybe it's worth getting everyone infected in real time if you had some level of confidence that your plan was really the right plan. But the fact is, Mormonism is demonstrably not true unless you're willing and able and allowed to take tons of conjecture. So this conference, it'll be interesting. We are about a week and a half away from this general conference, 2 weeks away from this general conference, and we'll see what they have in store. But I expect leaders of the church to point at President Nelson and try to find, as RFM just did yesterday, backdating prophecy. Instead of a foretelling, it is a post-telling, and taking words and making them sound as if the person actually does talk to God. I think that's unethical, but I expect it to see it happen. And then again, don't get a priesthood blessing. I mean, if you want to get one for comfort, fine, but don't do anything. Don't forget to do something else. In other words, don't get a blessing and go like, hey, I'm just going to get a blessing and then I'm going to stay home. If you have symptoms, go seek professional medical help. And they are asking, I think, people to call the hospitals first. If you have mild symptoms, they're going to suggest you just deal with it at home and self-quarantine yourself. Only folks with serious ailments, breathing difficulty, real hardship should make their way to the hospital, and only after calling first, if possible. And so everybody should be careful out there. I don't want to go too long today. I simply wanted to share that Utah is dealing with this. If I could bring the map up, the infectious disease, this infectious illness, and I keep using the wrong words, I'm sorry for that. This infectious illness, it's spreading rapidly. Again, most of us will have mild symptoms, maybe no symptoms at all. Mild symptoms, but about 20%, they're saying, will have severe symptoms, and somewhere between 10 and 20% will need serious medical attention. That's big. And out of that 10 or 20% that needs serious medical attention, there's a 5% of those or 10% of those that are going to have to either deal with death or something of the like. So be careful out there, everybody, and just realize that this isn't games. This isn't fake news. This isn't something that's going to pass quickly. It is deeply affecting our financial markets. It's deeply affecting our way of life. We humans are social creatures. I've got a really good group of friends, and all of them are self-isolating, themselves away from each other and from the rest of humanity. And at some point, I expect that isolation to become more severe as governments respond when the infected rate is significant in that area, to the point where now's the time to isolate everyone, and so that the hospitals don't reach peak capacity and medical staff don't have to start making decisions about who lives and who dies. I'm Bill Reel, host of Mormon Discussion Podcast. As this thing unfolds, and as Utah at some point gets some type of quarantine or isolation or order for all of us to stay in our homes, I hope to reach back out maybe on a daily or every other day basis and just update you guys on what's going on. Again, I'm a rational human being. I'm an intelligent human being. My gut tells me this is about to get really ugly. And so do everything you can to protect you and yours, but also to be compassionate and kind and helpful to the other humans that are out there, because we are tribal, and this is one tribe, the human race. Talk to all of you soon, and we'll see how everything unfolds. Have a great day.